thank you for having us here today. So, first question I had for everybody here is, how many people have received that directive somewhere in the last little bit? Some? Yeah. So, yeah. So if you haven't, you probably will before very long. And what's happening is that in many cases, let's see if I can get this to work now too. All right. I seem to be frozen here.
I think Microsoft is playing tricks on us again. I knew we should have had them as a sponsor. Okay. I just launched it again.
And this should just do it here.
Advancing?
Nope.
Oh,
Am I hitting the right button? The arrows?
yeah.
All right.
Should be.
Yeah, I'll just do it from the keyboard. That's okay. Yeah.
Okay.
That's all right. So usually what happens is that directive occurs because somebody in the finance department had gotten wind of this whole cloud thing and has then come down and said, we are going to move everything to the cloud. And they go and look inside the operations. And often the transcoding farm is probably the biggest system that's there, right? So they push in that direction. And there's really good reasons for it. They see that there's this notion of scalable capacity. Some of the things Elliot just talked about. So there's a scalable capacity. One of the big drivers that we hear all the time is eliminating the hardware refresh cycle. So there's this need to, every 3 years, replace 30% of the gear that's in the computer room, and then all you get for that is new computers and no other features or functionality. And then there are those who really want to go all in and just remove the facility, right? Just get rid of it. And so all those are good reasons, but then what you come to find is that if you even get into this at all, and all right, so nobody had actually been given a directive. How many folks in here have actually looked at this as a possibility for your organizations? So yeah, okay, a few, good. So if you've looked at it, then pretty soon you realize that there are these other benefits that you get from it that are key. This agile development notion is a really good one. It's right, so by the way, I'm with Telestream, right? So we always talk to you folks. We never get to talk to the people that I saw here earlier who were talking about the ease of the applications and making it simpler for the operators. For us, nobody in this room has ever come to us and said, will you please remove some features to make it easier for us? It's always put more in. So this process, everybody here is always being requested, can you do more for me? Can you start this project up? And it can take weeks to just get the hardware in place, ordered in place and up and operational. I always like to say that you can do it faster in the cloud than you can actually fill out the requisition form to get somebody to sign, right? So you can actually get your platforms up and running and operational to do the experiments that you need to do for these development projects. So that is a nice additional capability. And then finally, there's application benefits. And the notion of having a scalable platform that's accessible from anywhere in the world is really what I think is the biggest thing, but also is sort of the core to what I wanted to talk about today. We've spent the last year and a half developing a cloud platform and taking it out and letting different people use it and getting quite a bit of experience with that. And what we found almost 100% is that nobody is looking at this as a silver bullet, as the way to replace all of their infrastructure. And it wouldn't make sense to do so in our world. But because of these application benefits, it does inspire people to start thinking about different things that they've never been able to do or perhaps wanted to do. And now with this platform that you have that, like I said, is worldwide, it's scalable, and you have this internet connection to it for virtually anybody, enable some different possibilities. And to my mind, that is the biggest benefit of this technology. It's not how do you replace exactly what you have, but how do you do new things that you couldn't do otherwise. And so that's what, as we go through this, I'll sort of follow the trajectory that a lot of people have gone through. Before doing that, though, there's three things that have also become truisms for us as we went through it. Number one is when you start looking at, especially with video where you have these great big files that you have to deal with and move around, reconsider all the assumptions that you have in your head about how the computer performance works. That's CPUs, that's disk drives, that's networks, and sort of the relative relationship of all of those components. It's because effectively CPUs are free, or not free, but certainly very easy to get up there. Bandwidth, on the other hand, is something that's a lot harder to come by than it is on the ground. Storage, there's huge variability between the different types of storage technologies and the performance that you can get from them. So it's everything that you think you know as you go through this process of evaluating it, you just have to stop and check and check your numbers to make sure that they're what you expect. The other thing is that you have this new set, I mentioned this a few moments ago, but you have this new set of capabilities that's just unique, right? You can't get it anywhere else, or if you do want to get it, it costs an awful lot of money to implement that yourself. So if you open your mind to that, and you have this set of new possibilities that emerge for you if you accept that different perspective. And I just wanted to jump back 25 years now because I was actually warned of this that long ago and didn't pick up on it. If I say the name Ken Olsen, do you guys know who that is? Anybody? I had the opportunity of being able to work with Ken in a little startup after he left Digital. And no matter how early I got up, he was always in the office first. And one day I walked in and I think the sun had just come up and he's sitting there at a table looking, actually what we were doing was we were making the modular systems that C-Change first used for their ad insertion, right? That if anybody remembers those old cable systems that did the dynamic ad insertion, that was built out of our technology. And he's looking at this, really the packaging that we kept the computers in, right? He's just staring at it at 6:30 in the morning. I walked in and said, Ken, what are you doing? And he was a visionary like nobody I've ever met. And he said, Jim, what do you think the world will be like when computers are free? I said, Ken, you got hundreds of millions of dollars because computers aren't free. That's never going to happen. What he was seeing and what he was saying at that time was, there will come a time when computers are just like any other utility, right? The computes are going to be like water, power, and it's going to be an application-driven world. And this is what the cloud's all about. It's like, how do you take all of those costs, all those expenses that are associated with computer rooms full of hardware and make that more accessible through other devices? He wasn't even thinking phones at that time, but he just knew that the world was going to be driven by applications. And that's what I mean. If you sort of let yourself have that different perspective, here's a guy that started the second biggest computer company in the world, and he could see the whole thing being flushed right before his eyes 25 years ago. So that's what I wish I had seen it then, because I'd probably have a different job. But it was pretty remarkable. Anyway, so from our perspective, what does this mean, right? When somebody says, I want you to move the transcoding to the cloud, the first thing that typically comes to mind is like, well, what part of the transcoding? Because every operation that I know about, and there's been a lot of them, looks a lot like this, except that it's not a linear picture. It's actually, there's a transcoding system. Almost every one of you folks has got diagrams that shows what your architecture looks like. And in the middle of it is a transcoding farm that's handling the conversion of what comes out of the capture system, goes into the edit bay, what comes out of edit to become a mezzanine. When it goes out of the mezzanine, how does it get to a delivery format, right? And we all run that circle many, many times. So when someone says move the transcoding up, we know that these pieces don't easily move out of our operations, right? The capture and edit pieces, to put that all up in the cloud, despite what, I don't know if Manuel's still here, but despite what he said, that's typically something that's done on premise. So that leaves a piece of the, certainly a piece of the workflow that could certainly be moved to the cloud. But actually, I got a little ahead of myself here. The other thing that's driving a lot of this are our output formats. In our broadcast world or cable world, typically we're doing pretty high resolution video that comes out of this. So a round trip up and down to the cloud doesn't make a lot of sense. But for web-based deliveries, though, where you have distribution through a CDN, then it may make perfect sense to put those pieces into the cloud. So you look at that whole transcoding operation and you say, which pieces can most benefit? And typically what people do is they draw this line right here, they say, right? So I've got a mezzanine I can take that mezzanine, push that up to the cloud. I can distribute off of that, or I can deliver, deliver to my ground, my terrestrial distribution also. But that opens up another set of questions because, like I said before, you don't necessarily want to round trip those heavy files. So this hybrid system is what almost always comes into the picture before very long. So now what do you have is you've broken the transcoding up into a couple of places on the ground. You have some things up in the cloud, and now you're forced with a very important decision, and a hard one. Is that what is the mezzanine file supposed to look like if I'm going to put it on the ground, if I'm going to put it in the cloud? Is it the same thing? Is it a different one? Because you'll see as we go through this that one choice impacts almost everything in terms of performance, the throughput, your costs. All of that can be dramatically affected by the mezzanine format that you choose. And depending upon what you want to do with that mezzanine file, what sorts of components have to be included with that in terms of embedded metadata, are there captions with that, all the other elements that you typically ask when building that. So that becomes the single biggest choice. And when you go through this, like I said, we go through this trajectory here of the decision process. That's usually the first place where people reach some very deep soul searching, because there's just a lot to think about before you make that choice. Once you do make that choice, and if the picture ends up looking like this, it also introduces the need for effectively an arbitration system for how you decide which assets get processed where, right? So job request comes into the system, and then it becomes a matter of, do we process it in the cloud? Do we process it on the ground? And there's a series of questions associated with that. It's like, is the content already in the cloud? Is it on the ground? Do I have the rights to put it in the cloud? Is it, what's the round trip going to be like? So this arbitration system has to do a lot of logic, and it's good to be able to put that in a place where the switches can be pulled so that you can get the content to effectively get that workflow to finish properly. So then the next big question. So, all right, so we go through that. Usually when we have these conversations about my boss told me to do this in the cloud, the first thing I hear from people is a lot of resistance. It's like, I can't move the files up that fast. There's no way. It's like, we have these big files. They have to be processed immediately. How can I get those to the cloud in such a way that I can work with it? And there's actually somebody sitting 6 rows back who I was in a meeting with who said, Jim, even though he raised his hand for we got to get to the cloud, I was in a meeting with them, and they were saying that we have terabytes a day that we have to process. These are not getting up into the cloud without, we'd be better off with a truck full of disk drives than we would with a network connection, right? So there's those types of workflow decisions that you have to go through also, is just understanding what the load is, which is how much is it, what is the capacity of those networks. Remember I said the bandwidth is probably the hardest piece of all of this. What is the capacity of the networks to get that content where it needs to be so that we can have it, and how do you decide? Yes, sir?
Have you seen any documentation or run across any cloud service provider, so-called, that even talks about the network connection that you just mentioned?
Yes. So most of them will do a couple of things, right? So I'm very familiar with Amazon. That's where we did our work, so I'll talk about that. So they've certainly got partnerships with people like Aspera and Signiant, so you can do some acceleration of that content. But even for the terabytes a day that I just mentioned, that's not sufficient. They don't have enough bandwidth for that. So they offer a service that will you can, as a company, send them disk drives, and they'll load it up for you in their network if you want to do it that way.
No,
but
that's not the part of it I'm concerned about.
Oh.
What I'm concerned about is the network connection between the data center that hosts the cloud service and the premises. You mentioned Amazon. Amazon, their basic cloud only reaches out as far as their data center.
Yep.
You as a user have to get to that data center, which typically means you got to talk to a network service provider.
Well, there's a number of ways to establish that connection. One of the things we've done recently is we've been working with Aspera, and we've got, and I'll get to this in a few minutes, but we have native connections to the Aspera enterprise server, so that if you have content on the ground that gets loaded into that server, the application can see that from Amazon and pull it up through Aspera. So that's a way to accelerate that process directly connected to your enterprise, right? There are other protocols that can be used as well, so you can certainly FTP it. If you have a direct connection into, say, Amazon S3, which is what they call their object storage, that's also something you can do through a company like Aspera or Signiant. They have a way to communicate directly through that. So you can establish a secure, managed connection up into their, this sort of first tier storage that is usually the jumping off place before the content gets pulled into the transcode operation. Does that answer your question? Is that?
Sort of, but I'll get back to you a little bit later.
Okay. Okay. Yep. Next question, the next point of resistance usually is how much does it cost, right? So yeah, this is all sounds great, but there certainly are expenses involved with it. The computers aren't free yet, despite Ken's vision. So, but there's many ways to manage that. Now, what I want to do is I have some tools that we've put together, and I'll show you what I think have been good methods for doing that analysis. And then it's how do you keep it secure as you go. So the first thing I wanted to talk about, though, was the I/O. There are, even once you get to the cloud, so the question you were asking me was, how do you get to here, right? Was where you were asking, so from the ground to here. But once you get up there, or the process of getting there is typically over a connection that might be 1 or 2 megabytes a second, right? It's, yes?
Okay, but just quickly, you're in the right church, but there are two specific views in that church.
Yep.
One is the access facility between the premises and the underlying network to get to that location. The second piece that needs to be broken out is the so-called data network inside the data center that connects the outside network, the phone company, whatever, to the processing and other machinery servers that are in the cloud, the data center. There's several levels here, and the least talked about and most challenging part of this picture is this link between the premises or the user and the cloud facility.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm trying to address is that you can have from your on-premise down here, right? There's this link. This is your mezzanine transcode block from the other file, right? To get it to that cloud storage, there are a number of ways to do that, including the use. You have to have certainly a network provider that you work through. I don't know who offers that service to you, but the performance of that can certainly be managed. But if you have an Aspera server on premise, then you can manage the bandwidth that you have available to you with that link and send that directly up to Amazon.
Okay, thanks.
Right? I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but it's
We probably need a dialogue for 5 or 10 minutes. to
okay.
get that thing going.
Yeah, we'll try to get on the same page with that. I'll be around all day here. The next link to this, though, is when you go from what they call our object storage. In the case of Amazon, it's S3. It's about 100 megabytes a second to get it out of that storage across the bridge into where the computers are, right? What they call EC2. And that is, it's faster, but it's still not very fast. But then once you get inside their network, now we're looking at 700 to 800 to megabytes a second that actually can be achieved off of the different types of storage that they have. Now we spent a lot of time actually understanding that and how to make it go fast. But this is becomes a very important architectural decision also. So this is the next big one that you'll probably run into. You look at this I/O problem, and there's a couple of ways to approach it, and some of them, well, there's two, right? There's two ways to approach it. One way is to look at putting all of the different functionality that you might want to apply to that piece of content on every single transcoding node that's going to be part of your network in the cloud, right? So every feature, every function you want to have, you just have run on every one of those. You draw the content into it, and you process that and send it on its way. Another way to do it is to build a shared storage network, just like you would on the ground, and make that go as fast as you can. Then you can apply other functions. Even you can even choose different operating systems, different types of applications, and surround that media with those different applications. That becomes an important choice for your architecture, right? Because it really boils down to how much processing you want to do in the cloud. So, and I go one more here. So if you wish to do, and one of the, and this is again one of the other important pieces of learning that we have, that we've accumulated. People have been asked to do transcoding in the cloud, and usually that's insufficient. It's really not what they are really wanting to do or need to do. And what they have to do is move their content production operation steps, major steps up into the cloud, and that usually involves multiple applications. So you either have to get all those applications onto every single node or provide a shared storage method so that those applications can surround it. And that just becomes a choice into how what pieces of your workflow you want to move to the cloud. The next choices that you can make here are how the infrastructure is implemented at Amazon or with your cloud provider. And this is where we get into the alphabet soup again of different types of technologies. But the first one I want to talk about is infrastructure as a service. And that really provides, what's in orange is what's provided by the facility, and what's in blue is what has to be provided by either you or somebody that's providing your applications. And so all of the sort of scalable network, virtualization services, all of that are what goes into the infrastructure as a service. And then if you want to put different operating systems, different runtime environments, and so on top of that stack, then you would want to work with somebody that has a way to do that. If what you want to do is platform as a service, which pretty much takes you all the way up through the operating system layer, then you would say, in that case, you're making the architectural decision, and I'm going to run everything on Windows or everything on Unix, right? And it'll be contained within that. And then if you use software as a service, everything, that's sort of like effectively the YouTube model, where you just take your video and push it up into a window and it goes away, right? And so that doesn't allow you much flexibility. Like I said before, I've talked to people in this room and nobody has ever asked me to do less, right? Hide it behind a button, right? So usually all you folks that have your jobs are looking for as much flexibility as you can possibly get out of those environments. So again, something to consider when you're looking at each of the different providers. Okay, that sort of takes us through the early design phases, but I/O clearly is a big deal. Operating environments is another, and then how you construct that network for ultimate flexibility is a third thing that you probably want to consider. Are there any questions so far before we get into the cost analysis? Yes, sir.
So the previous slide, I'm afraid I didn't follow something.
Yes, sir.
You're talking about effectively outsourcing to a cloud service, whatever that is. Hello. You're talking about effectively outsourcing to a cloud service some portion of what you used to do in your own office. Is that correct?
Not exactly. This would mean using a cloud infrastructure provider to give you infrastructure, right? So part of your operation that you were running. And so instead of running it on a computer in the next room, you're moving your infrastructure up to that. So you're not really turning it over to somebody as a service, but actually using a different platform.
Okay, so if you buy a bunch of computing service from Amazon, say, then depending on how far into it you go, I'm trying to imagine what the person sitting at their desk is like, okay, now I have to do this task. And I used to do it on this server over here with this stuff. Now what do they do?
Let me slow down on this then. Okay, so.
Just a little.
Yep, okay, yep. So there are people, like Elliot just left, right? That's Elemental, right? There's us, Telestream. There's also a company called encoding.com and ZenCoder that are offering these services, right? So sort of the Elemental and Telestream model is we have put effectively our software platforms, our Vantage, their Elemental servers, running at Amazon, right? So you, within your environment, you can choose to then make decisions about where you want to run any individual job. And that might be based on sort of the burst requirements that if you don't have enough capacity, you might use that for your reason, right? And I'll show you some other examples that people have worked with us on that are all about the application space. It's not even the fact that they're concerned about capacity, but it's just they want to take advantage of this globally accessible computing platform to expose that. So you, as like an engineering team, are going to decide, how can I use that platform to do something that I need to do, right? And so still be running our software or theirs in the cloud. If it's something like encoding.com or Zencoder, what you have there is effectively, it does nothing but the transcoding, right? So you can send the content up, it'll turn it into a format and send it back, right? None of this sort of optimized hierarchical workflow concepts that we would at Telestream would talk about. I'm trying not to talk too much about our product, but yeah, but so does that make sense? Is that, you understand what I'm saying? Yeah. Okay. All right, so let's just spend a few minutes on the costs and how you can evaluate that. There's really three things that you'll want to look at in terms of comparing costs. One is, like just mentioned, the 4 vendors. It's like, how do you compare what it's going to cost you to do the job on any of those different platforms? Second thing is what does the facility cost you? And I've actually found a nice tool for evaluating that. So it models the size of the building, the people that are in it, the amount of power you're consuming, all that, and then comes up with an annual cost for that. And then the other thing you want to do is compare exactly what it costs you to sort of take the facility out, but what are you actually paying for hardware and software to do it on the ground, and then what would it cost you to do in the cloud? And with those 3 items, you have a pretty good view of what the world looks like. In terms of price models from the different vendors, of course, there's 4 of us, so there's 4 models. So that's so that's makes it just to make this exercise more interesting. The way Zencoder does it is they charge a price per minute of output video, right? So if you have an hour in and you're making a 5-layer adaptive bit rate output, you're going to pay for 5 hours of output. Okay. There's actually an error in the slide. The encoding.com, you pay for it's a dollars per gigabyte for the content that you push up and push out of their system, right? So they sort of charge you for all the bytes that you moved. Elemental, and I don't know if Ellie's still here, but I have some numbers I was able to extrapolate. I don't know if they're 100% right, and I'll talk about that, but they have a way to pre-purchase capacity, so you pay them a certain amount each you pay them a certain dollar amount and you get a certain number of hours that you can run their system for based on that. And then our way of doing it is the price per hour. Just as the software is running in the cloud, how much does that cost? These are the details of that. The sort of the take home of this, and it's worth going through it, is that there's actually a number of characteristics here as to how they all work. But Zencoder and encoding.com, the big difference sort of between their functionalities, Zencoder does live, encoding.com does not, right? So if that's a part of what you want to do, that's one thing to consider. The other is the different price models that I mentioned. But with those 2 models, how much are you making and how much you're putting up in terms of gigabytes and how many gigabytes you're taking out, both of those are very easy to predict, right? What it's going to cost you on any, yes, sir.
Looks like you have a little bit of a mention in your line down there, but there's also the cost of the compute power in the cloud system like Amazon, as well as the storage cost, and the cost to move that data in and out of systems.
Yep. That's true. That's true. Certainly worth looking at. But generally, these other costs are larger than that. Elemental they have live, and what they do is, I think this number is right. I just extrapolated from, there was a report that was done in streaming media, and I just pulled the numbers out of that, but I haven't been able to verify them. But checking back with streaming media, they would tell me the price model, but he said you're close enough to present it. So I've done that. But it looks like it's $29.95, and then you get 275 hours of output, or of usage. And for us, it's $10 an hour for the software that's running on the encoding servers. And so what's a little more difficult with this, it's if you know what your performance is going to be, for the job that you want to do, then you can figure out how much it costs. But otherwise, it's not as easy to predict as the others. But the real benefit of this is as the technology advances at Amazon, the prices of these come down for the same job, right? And so that can be pretty dramatic, whereas the others will not move based on performance. And so I did an example of just XDCAM 50, HD 50 as source media. Remember before I said that when you choose your mezzanine file, that can make a big difference in the costs? That's because if you look at the encoding.com, based on the size of the mezzanine file that you choose, you pay a lot more or a lot less. But obviously your result and output quality for all your derivative outputs is affected by that. So there's everything's a trade-off, right? So XDCAM 50, that's really to address the encoding.com method. I picked a 21 layer, so it was a 7 HLS outputs, each 3 layers deep, so 21 layers. That really is so we could look at how Zencoder's charges get affected by that, because it's all by output. And then assumed real time for each of these processes, so that Elemental and we would sort of be on the same footing with that. And you can sort of see where this all comes out. The one that's, you can see that chart. And those things will move around depending upon changing the values, but the relative positions of them, I think, will remain pretty similar. Okay, so then the next thing is this total cost of ownership study. So these slides are being distributed, right? Is that correct? Afterwards. So I've got a link in here so you can get to this yourself if you want to see it. And I know I'm short of time, so I'm not going to open the spreadsheet. But this has got a really good model. It's developed by a group of guys from Stanford University. And with that, you provide information about the size of the facility, the hours that it's in operation, the number of racks of servers that you're going to have in there. So that includes your storage as well as your processing, the power density within that, and then cost per kilowatt hour. And with all of that, it can pretty much derive a total cost of ownership for that facility. So I did a model here just so we could see what it looks like. And for this particular case, where you can see that I made it a 10,000 square foot facility, just put 4 racks in for the transcoding. There were 16 4U servers, storage and networking, it's appropriate. And then I took the US government provided kilowatt hour costs that you can find on the internet. And basically it was about $4 million a year to run that facility, right? So if you're gonna go all in and put everything in the cloud and spend $4 million, for the system configuration that I picked, you could run 35 servers full-time in Amazon for that $4 million, right? So that's another data point. So how much facility cost can you pull out of that operation? Then the next thing is to compare and this is a spreadsheet that I put together myself, but you can see what the elements are in that. What you want to do is an on-premise comparison to what you currently own or might own, and compare that against the pricing that you get from the different vendors to do it in the cloud. And so in this particular case, I did a couple of different models that I thought were most useful. One is to figure out for whatever workload you think you have, right? In this case, I took 16 hours a day, 5 days a week. I thought that was a reasonable one. The size of the server farm, what those costs are, and then did an analysis on just what it cost to purchase those, did a 3-year depreciation on that, put annual support in, so you have a CapEx and OpEx expenditure, and then sort of did the same kind of calculation for what that capacity would be at Amazon. And it's about 60% more expensive in this particular case to run it at Amazon per hour than it would be to run it locally. But the thing is, you can shut them off at Amazon, right? You can just turn them off and you don't pay anymore. So you're not necessarily paying what you would pay on an annual basis for the on-premise. But that becomes a management question. Then the other analysis that I did was, let me see, yeah, this is the one. was to do a break even. So and effectively, how many hours would I have to run this to achieve the cost of a software license, right? And so in this particular case, if I did 10,000 hours of transcoding, right? If the systems are running for 10,000 hours total, then that was effectively the cost of the software license. So that's a useful one to run periodically if you choose to run this kind of hybrid environment. So you go back and check every now and then and say, in this particular case, it was the 10,000 hours, I'm approaching 10,000 hours. It's cheaper to just go buy another software license and then start building up whatever additional capacity is needed in the cloud. So, and in this case, there's the numbers that I have for the transcode rate of 216 an hour. That in a change that we're about to make, hopefully on June 1st, if Amazon we get through all their gates, the price of that is going to go from 260 an hour down to 77 cents an hour. So that's what I was saying before, is that you see these dramatic price decreases as their technology improves, that'll change all these numbers. So you want to run them, pretty regularly. Every time you know that there's a change in the technology, which is, every few months at Amazon or Microsoft, you'll be able to go back and run this calculation again and see how that turns out. So basically, you take those three different models, and that gives you a really good view of what it's going to cost you to either run it in the cloud all in, run a hybrid, do the comparison, how much you can say against your hardware, compare all the different vendors, and then use the data center costs. So then you can go through, when you have all that information, then you can really go through a process, regardless of which method you choose, to really minimize the costs in the cloud. And there's a lot of different ways to do that, depending upon who you work with. But there's certainly segmenting your workflows and so that you're starting and stopping in a way that is most efficient is probably the most important thing you can do. This calculating the break-even analysis is an important one. If you think that those are going to be levels that you maintain over the course of time, then that's a good number to have in mind always. Automating the on-demand provisioning is also key. It's very easy to make a mistake and leave a system running over the weekend and then end up paying for that. So you don't want to do that. So it's really good to automate that process, whether it's on a clock or based on the loading that you have, but have a system set up that automates that. And then there are certainly ways in any of these capabilities to buy ahead. So you can put down a certain amount of money, and that will reduce the costs per hour of your execution. So there's a lot of cost strategies that you can deploy once you know what you want to do. Because we were short of time, I'm going to remove a lot of the security talk that I had, because that takes longer. What's that?
About 5 minutes.
I have 5 minutes? Yeah, so let me skip right over this then, because I wanted to get to some of these other applications, because these are the things I mentioned before. There are people that have come up with some really good ideas for how to use the cloud for deployments, and I wanted to touch on some of these. The ones at the bottom of the list, the fast prototyping, new project startup, discretionary capacity, those are all the ones that come to mind right away. So I'm not going to spend any time on that, but the top three are the ones that were most interesting. One is the content library, and everybody calls this a Netflix model, right? So that's where, and there's a lot of companies that are starting to do this. Yeah, I realize for sort of news and broadcast, that's not necessarily a good model, because things are changing every day. But if you have a content library that you can keep in the cloud, because the storage is very inexpensive relative to the cost of a building and the cost of all the servers, and then just spin up the servers to transcode for a delivery that you need to make and then tear it all back down again, that is a very cost-efficient way of dealing with a large content library. And like I said, that's the Netflix model that everybody talks about. Very useful. Internet distribution. If you are doing internet distribution as part of your workflow, this is where that arbitration system that I showed you comes into play. The people that have successfully done this have implemented a couple of strategies that were very, very useful. And typically, what will happen is that as soon as content comes out of edit, right, so it's bound for on-air broadcasts as well as going to some of their electronic distributions, that edited piece of content gets distributed to both places right away. So it goes to Amazon and it goes to their local system. And then the arbitration system, depending upon any of the questions that you might want to ask, can make a real-time decision about how to process that content and do the deliveries. That was probably the single biggest success factor, was planning for how that content distribution goes and building that into the overall workflow. Okay, there's my little animation. All right, get through that. This next one I thought was probably the most powerful one, and for the folks in this room is probably the most interesting one. There was, this happened at NAB, there was one of the big 3-letter networks in New York City had a VP of technology come up, and he heard we were working on this cloud concept. And when I showed him how we were deploying it, honest to gosh, he rocked back on his heels and then came back upright and said, this just solved a problem I've been trying to get to for a long time. And I didn't know how to do it, but I just had the vision. And what he wanted to do was enable citizen journalists, right, sort of across the world, right, to have an application on their cell phones that he could use to alert them if there was a newsworthy event that was anywhere near them. Because he had the GPS locations from the phones, right, he could say, there's a ship in trouble, you know, off the coast of the bay here right now. Anybody within a mile, run out and start taking video, right? And it's interesting because that video that you were taking not only was the content that they wanted, but it also had the time of day, it had a location, had all this different metadata that was associated with it. And because it's in a cell phone app, it'll be delivered right to where he wants it, right? So that gets uploaded after it's shot. Those servers then are spun up. He says, I know that I've triggered this event, so now I'm going to spin up the servers. They arrive. It starts processing the video and then delivers it to all of the different partner sites that they need, right? So that was very nice, fast implementation to be first to get the content on air, right? However, there were a lot of things that you need to do when that content comes up because it's arriving from every one of us has a cell phone, has a different device, right? It's probably nobody in the room has the one I have. And so the video is a little bit different. The metadata is a little bit different. The aspect ratio could be vertical, could be sideways, right? So this content goes up, and then you need a system that has logic in it that can open up those files, detect what it's got, scan through it for all these different elements, and then including things like perhaps even language filtering, right? There might be somebody's shooting an event, there might be something that shows up in the audio that you don't want to put on air, right? Just because they're surprised at what they're looking at. So, so all of those different things in terms of processing that content to normalize it, whether to get the orientation right, do something with the audio, fix problems with it, maybe put it in quarantine, sort it out, or format it for output. All of that wants to happen in the cloud without a person looking at it, because the whole goal of this is to automate it and make it fast, right? And so that's why he was looking at this system. Remember I said before, you had this shared storage. Now he could put these different analytical tools around that shared storage that you couldn't have done if he was just trying to do a transcode, right? So that was, I thought, one of the most interesting things. And then, of course, there's an output QC, too, just to make sure that what you have will actually play on where you want to send it. So all of those different steps are something that wants to occur in that cloud, which I thought was, like I said, it was remarkable to see that inspiration come to him just based on what he saw. So looks like I'm going to make it just in time. The bottom line here is that this is, the way I look at it, it's just another technology arrow in your quiver, right? If you are looking to do some of these new applications, some of these new concepts, the cloud might be a way, putting transcoding services or media production services in the cloud might be a way to get there that you wouldn't have otherwise. So the best thing to do, this is just my checklist for getting started, is reach out to all these different vendors and start a trial. Just figure it out, get familiar with it, understand some of those capabilities and limitations that the platform offers, and get familiar with that. Experiment with it a lot. Try small files, big files, urgent files. See, the question that was asked earlier about what's my network connection look like that gets my media up there, right? understand what that is, so you know what the limitations are, what changes you want to make. Then I've given you the models. You can see what you think your costs are going to be, and then you can make determinations on the impact of the existing operation. So once you have all of that, you've got a pretty good model for what you can do and can't do. And if you have a project that you want to take forward, then you have all the information that you need to go make the business case to talk to your, to talk to the people in your company. So with that, I guess I only have one other slide. This is all my contact information. So if you wish to get a hold of me or have any questions or want to get started, or have questions about the tools I have, I'll be happy to share all that with you. So thank you for your time today. I appreciate it. And I guess I'll turn it back over to you, Rick, and we're on to our break.